Picture this, you're standing in your dream home, but the front door literally falls off its hinges onto a bank representative. There's a wall built through your bathtub. Kitchen cabinets hanging by roofing nails. And everyone's telling you to just sign the papers and accept this disaster. What would you do? My parents found themselves in exactly this nightmare in 1973, and what their attorney did next didn't just solve the problem, it became the stuff of legal legend. If you've ever been pushed around by people who thought they had all the power, you're going to love this story. Hit that subscribe button because today we're diving into a tale of justice so perfectly executed, it'll restore your faith in the little guy fighting back. Like this video, drop a comment about the worst contractor horror story you've ever heard, and let's get into this masterpiece of legal warfare. Let me take you back to 1973. My parents had scraped together enough money to build their dream, a modest ranch house in the countryside. Not a mansion, not some elaborate estate, just a simple home where they could raise their 2 young children away from the cramped, nasty rental they'd been stuck in. After years of saving every penny, they finally had their down payment. The small town bank seemed friendly enough. They approved the mortgage without much fuss and signed a contract with a local contractor named Bob to build the house. Everything seemed perfect. My parents were finally going to have their piece of the American dream. But Bob, as it turns out, was running a shell game all over town. He was taking on more contracts than any human being could possibly handle, then disappearing to chase the next payday while leaving his crew of what I can only describe as construction disasters to handle the actual building. Now, when I say things went wrong, I don't mean like a crooked picture frame or the wrong shade of beige paint. I'm talking about catastrophic, mind-boggling incompetence that defied the laws of physics and common sense. The architect had apparently forgotten to fully erase a line on the blueprints. So what did the framers do when they saw this phantom line? Did they call and ask? Did they use their brains and realize that maybe, just maybe, you don't build a wall through the middle of where a bathtub is supposed to go? Of course not. They built the wall. Right through the bathtub space. My parents showed up one day to check progress and found a 2x4 frame cutting the bathroom in half. But wait, it gets worse. The kitchen cabinets, you know, those things that are supposed to hold your dishes, your food, your cooking supplies, were attached to the drywall with roofing nails. Not screwed into studs like any competent person would do. Roofing nails. Through drywall. My mother was literally told, don't put anything heavy in these cabinets, or they'll fall off the wall. Imagine being told that about your own kitchen. Oh, by the way, don't actually use your cabinets for storage, because we couldn't be bothered to attach them properly. It's like buying a car and being told, just so you know, don't use the brakes, we only kind of attached them. And the garage? The garage door opening was framed to open into the living room. Not toward the driveway where cars actually exist, but into the house. Because apparently Bob's crew thought people might want to park their Buick next to the sofa. There was the plumber who left his lunch bag on a partially built kitchen cabinet. When the cabinet maker showed up, did he move the brown bag that was clearly someone's forgotten sandwich? No. He decided that wasn't his job and built the rest of the cabinet around it. There was literally a lunch bag permanently entombed in my parents' kitchen cabinetry like some kind of construction time capsule. Every day brought a new horror story. Every visit to the construction site revealed another example of incompetence so profound it seemed almost intentional. My parents would drive out there after my dad finished his first job, because he was working 2 jobs to afford this house, and they'd find something else that made no sense. The electrical work looked like it had been done by someone who'd never seen electricity before. The plumbing seemed designed by someone who thought water flowed uphill. The foundation had issues that would make a geology professor weep. Meanwhile, my mother was trapped in that awful rental with 2 small children, crying herself to sleep most nights. This was supposed to be the happiest time of their lives, finally building their first home, finally achieving that milestone that meant they'd made it. Instead, it was a daily nightmare of stress, frustration, and watching their dream turn into a construction site horror movie. My dad was working 16-hour days between his 2 jobs, coming home exhausted only to deal with phone calls about the latest disaster at the house site. He started losing weight. The stress was eating him alive. He'd saved for years for this opportunity, and it was turning into the worst experience of his life. And through it all, Bob was nowhere to be found. He'd show up just long enough to collect payment, make excuses, promise things would get better, then vanish again. His crew would continue their reign of terror on basic construction principles while Bob was off somewhere else, probably destroying someone else's dreams. The bank's attitude made everything worse. Instead of being concerned that their investment was being turned into a construction disaster zone, they kept pressuring my parents to just accept the work and sign off. "It's not that bad," they'd say. "Just needs a few touch-ups." A few touch-ups? The house needed to be torn down and started over by people who understood that walls don't go through bathtubs and cabinets need to be attached to something more substantial than hopes and dreams. But the bank had already paid Bob a significant portion of the contract, and they wanted this nightmare to end. They didn't care if my parents ended up in a death trap that would collapse the first time someone sneezed too hard. They wanted their paperwork signed and their loan on the books. The bullying got worse as the months dragged on. Bank representatives would call my mother during the day, while my dad was at work, and pressure her to just sign the papers. "Your husband is being unreasonable," they'd tell her. "This is just normal construction. You're holding up the process." Normal construction? There was a wall through the bathtub. The kitchen cabinets were attached with the construction equivalent of Scotch tape. The garage door opened into the living room. If this was normal construction, then I'm the Queen of England. My parents were scared. They'd put their life savings into this down payment. They were paying rent on a terrible apartment while also paying for a house they couldn't live in. The financial pressure was enormous, and everyone with power, the bank, the contractor, even the contractor's crew, was treating them like they were the problem. This went on for months. Months of my mother crying, my father getting more and more depressed, their savings dwindling, their dream house looking more like a construction site that had been hit by a tornado of incompetence. Then came the final inspection. The bank sent a representative out to look at Bob's completed work and pressure my parents to sign off once and for all. My parents met him in the front yard, steeling themselves for another round of bullying and gaslighting. "Look, this has gone on long enough," the bank representative said, his voice already taking on that condescending tone they'd come to know so well. "The work is done. It's time to stop being difficult and sign these papers." My parents, exhausted from months of fighting, stood their ground. "We're not signing off on this," my father said quietly. "The house isn't built correctly. It's not safe. We won't live in it as it is." The bank representative's face turned red. He'd had enough of these difficult customers who didn't appreciate the fine work that Bob had done. In a dramatic gesture meant to show how solid and well-built the house was, he strode over to the front door. "See? This is a perfectly good house," he declared, grabbing the door handle and pulling on it to demonstrate how sturdy everything was. The entire door, frame, casing, and all, fell right on top of him. Not just the door. The whole assembly. It had been wedged into place, not nailed, not screwed, not attached in any meaningful way. Just sort of balanced there like a house of cards waiting for the slightest disturbance. My dad said watching that door fall on the bank representative was like something out of a Three Stooges movie, except it wasn't funny because this was supposed to be their home. This was supposed to be the place where they'd raise their children, where they'd build their life together. After extracting himself from under the door, the bank representative called Bob, demanding that he get out to the site immediately and start supervising the work himself instead of letting his crew of construction catastrophes run wild. Bob finally showed up, probably figuring he'd better see what the fuss was about since the bank was threatening to stop payments. But here's the thing about Bob, he wasn't actually any better at construction than the people working for him. He was just better at talking people into giving him money. Bob looked at the door lying in pieces, at the wall built through the bathtub space, at the kitchen cabinets hanging by roofing nails, at the garage door opening into the living room, and basically shrugged. Yeah, we can fix some of this stuff, he said, like he was talking about touching up paint instead of rebuilding an entire house. My parents had reached their breaking point. They refused to sign off on the house. They'd rather lose their down payment, rather face foreclosure, rather start over completely than accept this disaster as their home. That's when the threats started in earnest. The bank, now out a significant amount of money with a house they couldn't sell to anyone with functioning eyeballs, threatened foreclosure. Bob, facing the prospect of not getting the rest of his payment, threatened to sue my parents for breach of contract. My parents were trapped. They had almost no money left, just their small down payment savings, and they were facing legal action from both the bank and the contractor. If this turned into a lengthy court battle, they'd be financially destroyed. The bank and Bob had deep pockets and expensive lawyers. My parents had stress, exhaustion, and a legitimate grievance against people who apparently thought building codes were just suggestions. That's when they made the decision to see an attorney. They couldn't afford much legal help, but they couldn't afford not to get some either. They found a lawyer named Tom who agreed to meet with them and review their situation. My dad said walking into Tom's office was terrifying. Here they were, two working-class people who'd never been involved in any kind of legal action, sitting across from this attorney with a stack of contracts, inspection reports, and photographs of construction disasters. Tom listened patiently as they explained the whole sorry mess. The wall through the bathtub. The cabinets attached with roofing nails. The garage door opening into the living room. The front door that fell off when someone touched it. The plumber's lunch bag entombed in the kitchen cabinetry. As Tom flipped through the paperwork, my dad said he could see the attorney's face getting more and more grave. This was clearly not going well. Tom's expressions suggested that my parents were in serious trouble, that they were going to lose everything they'd worked for. The contracts were thick with legal language that my parents didn't understand. The bank had money and lawyers. Bob had money and lawyers. My parents had a few $100s and a house that was uninhabitable. Tom spent what felt like hours going through every document, every contract, every piece of paper related to the construction and the mortgage. My parents sat there watching their last hope reviewing their case with increasingly grim expressions. And then, suddenly, Tom's whole demeanor changed. He looked up from the papers with the first smile my parents had seen from anyone in months. "Let's get everyone together for a meeting," Tom told them. "Tomorrow." My parents didn't know what he'd found, but something in Tom's voice suggested that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as powerless as everyone had been telling them. The next day, they all gathered at the bank. My parents and Tom on one side of the conference table. The bank's representative and the bank's attorney on the other. Bob and Bob's attorney squeezed in wherever they could fit. Everyone looked grim except for Tom, who seemed almost relaxed. Before anyone else could start with their prepared speeches about how unreasonable my parents were being, Tom took control of the meeting. "Well," Tom said in a calm, conversational tone, "my clients have decided that they no longer want this house. Please remove it." The silence that followed was the kind you get right before a bomb goes off. Then everyone else in the room started laughing. Not happy laughter. The kind of laughter you get when someone says something so ridiculous that you can't believe they're serious. "Remove it," the bank's attorney said, still chuckling. "Have you lost your mind? You can't just remove a house. That's not how any of this works." Bob was nodding along. "Yeah, we built the house. It's built. You can't unbuild a house just because you don't like some of the details." The bank representative, probably still sore from having a door fall on him, was practically sneering. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're under contract. You can't just decide you don't want the house." Tom waited for the laughter to die down. Then, in a theatrical gesture that my dad said was like something out of a movie, he placed a single document on the conference table. "My clients own the land the house is sitting on outright," Tom said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "They no longer want the house. Get the house off my client's land." The laughter stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Bob's attorney grabbed the document and stared at it. His face went from confused to shocked to horrified in about 3 seconds. "You built a house on land you don't own," he said, turning to stare at Bob like he'd just confessed to burning down an orphanage. Bob nodded slowly, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. The bank's attorney was having his own moment of horror as he processed what this meant. "You didn't finance the land the house is on," he yelled at the bank representative, who was starting to look like he might be sick. No," the representative stammered. Tom's voice cut through the chaos with the precision of a legal scalpel. "As I said, gentlemen, you're trespassing on my client's land. I expect the house to be removed and the land returned to its original state. At once." My dad said the looks that passed between everyone on the other side of the table were something he'd remember for the rest of his life. You could actually see their brains processing the magnitude of the disaster they'd created for themselves. The bank had loaned money for a house built on land they didn't own. They could foreclose on the mortgage, but what good would that do? They'd be foreclosing on a house that would need to be torn down and removed, with no way to recoup their investment. They didn't own the land, so they couldn't sell the property to get their money back. Bob was facing complete financial ruin. He'd already spent money out of his own pocket on materials and labor. Now he was looking at having to pay to tear down the entire house and haul it away. Plus, the bank would undoubtedly want him to repay the money they'd already given him, since the house he'd built was worthless to them. Could they have tried to go after my parents anyway? Sure. A foreclosure would have damaged my parents' credit. They might have lost their down payment. But to sign off on the house in its current condition would have meant spending thousands and thousands of dollars just to make it habitable, money my parents didn't have, as the bank well knew since they're the ones who had approved the original mortgage amount. The legal landscape had shifted completely in a matter of seconds. Suddenly, my parents weren't powerless victims being bullied by institutions with more money and lawyers. They were landowners dealing with trespassers who had built an unauthorized structure on their property. The transformation in everyone's attitude was immediate and complete. The bank representative who had been condescending and dismissive was now apologetic and accommodating. "This is all just a big misunderstanding," he said. "We're all reasonable people here. We can work this out." Bob, who had been arrogant and dismissive of my parents' legitimate concerns about his shoddy work, was suddenly very interested in making sure they were happy. "We can fix everything," he promised. "Whatever you want, we'll make it right." The bank's attorney was already calculating damage control. The bank's representative who had been pressuring my parents and had literally had a door fall on him was clearly going to be looking for a new job very soon. Tom, meanwhile, was enjoying every second of it. This was the kind of case that attorneys dream about, a David and Goliath story where David wins not through luck or sympathy, but through superior legal strategy and the other side's own incompetence. "My clients are reasonable people," Tom said. "They just want the house they contracted for, built to the specifications they agreed to, on the land they own." Is that really so much to ask? Suddenly, it wasn't too much to ask at all. The house was brought up to the original blueprint specifications immediately. Not eventually. Not when Bob got around to it. Immediately. The wall that had been built through the bathtub space was removed and rebuilt correctly. The kitchen cabinets were properly attached to the wall studs with appropriate hardware. The garage door opening was reframed to actually open toward the driveway instead of into the living room. The front door was installed with actual nails and screws instead of being wedged into place like a cork in a wine bottle. Every single item that my parents had complained about was fixed, and fixed properly, at no additional cost to them. Bob ate the cost of all the materials and labor required to rebuild substantial portions of the house. The bank, eager to get this nightmare off their books and avoid any further legal complications, made sure that everything was completed to specification. My parents finally signed the mortgage papers, but now they were signing for a house that was actually built correctly. Bob got the rest of his payment from the bank, but after all the costs of redoing his botched work, he barely broke even on the entire project. The bank's representative who had been so dismissive and condescending was quietly let go. And Tom? Tom got the satisfaction of a perfectly executed legal maneuver that he would tell to fellow attorneys for the rest of his career. It became his signature story, the case where he turned a seemingly hopeless situation into total victory with a single document. Sometimes justice isn't about elaborate revenge schemes or getting even. Sometimes it's about having the right knowledge at the right moment and knowing exactly how to use it. My parents' attorney didn't just win their case, he taught everyone in that room a lesson about the importance of doing things correctly the first time. If this story of legal brilliance and sweet justice made your day, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of underdogs who fought back and won. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed? Drop it in the comments below, I read every single one. And if you know someone who's ever dealt with a nightmare contractor, share this video with them. They'll thank you for it. Until next time, remember, sometimes the little guy has the biggest surprise of all.